this video, I'm going to be talking about how we label the sides of a triangle. This is a very important skill in trigonometry and to a lesser extent Pythagoras' theorem. So what we have here is a right angle triangle. Now this naming really only becomes useful in right angle triangles, so we might as well start with a right angle triangle from the beginning. I can tell it's a right angle triangle because of this little blue square in the corner, which tells me this is a 90-degree angle. I'm making this a right angle triangle. Now over here you'll notice I've labelled another angle. I've made this one green. And that's because when we're labelling the sides of a triangle, it all depends on the angle we're talking about. So normally in a question they'll make it as clear as they can which angle we're referring to in all this. So in this case I'm going to refer to this one in the corner, and I'm actually going to give this a name. I'm going to call it theta so that I can refer to it more easily. Now we don't have to call this theta. I want to be very clear on that. We could call this anything. We could give it any letter name. Theta is just a Greek letter. We could give this any letter name. But theta is the traditional one. It's the old-fashioned one that we often just stick to. So I've called this one theta. And now I want to use this theta to label the sides of the triangle. So the first name we're going to go with is hypotenuse. Now hypotenuse is a Greek word, and it just means the longest side of a triangle. That's what we mean by hypotenuse, the longest side of a triangle. Now I could measure all these sides, work out which is the longest one, and I would find it's this one. But actually, there's a quicker way if we're talking about right angle triangles. I just need to label the one opposite the right angle, because the side opposite the right angle has to be the longest side of the triangle. So if this is my right angle, the side opposite has to be the hypotenuse. Okay, now that we've named this one, I can also name this base side, this one along the bottom. The name we give to that one is the adjacent side. We call it adjacent because adjacent just means next to. It's next to the angle theta. Now you'll notice that there are actually two sides that are next to theta, but we've already called this one the hypotenuse. We don't need to give it two names. We only need to give it one. So we've already named this one the hypotenuse. The other side that's next to theta is then the adjacent side. So it's a good idea when you're labeling your triangles to start with hypotenuse and then go with adjacent. Then finally, this other side that we haven't bothered to name yet, we are going to call the opposite side. Obviously, because it's opposite theta. Okay, now you notice that these names do depend on theta. They really do depend on that angle. So if I move that angle to the top instead, to this top corner, it is going to slightly change how I name the triangle. So this side before was the hypotenuse. We called it the hypotenuse because it was the longest side and it was the side opposite the right angle. Well, that's all still true. So that's still going to be the hypotenuse. That one doesn't change. However, now, this side that we last time called the opposite is now next to theta. So we're actually going to call this the adjacent side. And we're going to call the other side the opposite side. So you've got to make sure you know which angle you're talking about before you try to label the angles, before you try to label the sides, sorry. Because it depends which angle you're talking about, which changes these names. Okay, as a final example, I've just flipped the triangle a little bit, rotated it round so that it looks a bit different. Because of course all this naming system would work with any right angle triangles, at any orientation, at any side lengths, whatever. So we're going to use the exact same idea. We're going to find the longest side first, which is always the one opposite the right angle. We're going to call that the hypotenuse. Then we're going to call the other side that's next to theta the adjacent side. And finally, we're going to call the side opposite theta the opposite side. Okay, so the key points from this video. The hypotenuse of a triangle is always the longest side. That's just the name we give to the longest side of a triangle. In a right angle triangle, this is the side that's opposite to the right angle. And if we've labelled another angle, say theta, we can label the sides adjacent and opposite to this angle.